Hello, I'm Tom Connell and welcome to Question Time Wrap of the Australian Parliament for the 22nd of May until June the 1st. Well, the terror attacks in Manchester certainly had an impact all the way down here in Australia. The Prime Minister asked about his thoughts, including keeping Australians safe.
The member for Barrera has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the Manchester terrorist attack and what the government is doing to keep Australians safe, including in my electorate of Barrera?
Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr Speaker, I spoke with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Theresa May, last night, and I conveyed to her the heartfelt sympathies, the condolences of the Australian people to the people of Britain and to the victims of this shocking criminal attack and their families. I reaffirmed to her the resolute solidarity of Australia with Britain, partners now, as we always have been and always will, in freedom's cause. And Prime Minister May thanked me and thanked this Parliament for the solidarity we showed yesterday as we spoke, the Leader of the Opposition and I spoke in unison, united in our solidarity, our sympathy for our friends in the United Kingdom. This was a shocking criminal attack on innocents. At least 22 people have been murdered, 59 injured, many of them children, as we know. This was a children's concert. This attack was designed to kill children. What could be more vile, more reprehensible, more criminal than this crime? It was committed by a coward. And brave men and women, Australians and Britons alike, will not be cowed by terrorism wherever it occurs. We will not change our way of life, and we will continue to fight together, as the Prime Minister and I reaffirmed last night, to defeat this scourge of terrorism in our homes and around the world. Now, the Director-General of Security, Mr Speaker, has advised me that Australia's threat level remains at probable. There do not appear at this stage to be direct links between the attack in Manchester and threats in Australia. But we must remain vigilant at home, always, where the threat remains very real. The threat level is probable. Now, today, the New South Wales coroner handed down his report into the Lindt Cafe siege. Our heartfelt sympathies go out once again to the families of Katrina Dawson and Tory Johnson, as well as all of the hostages, the brave hostages who survived that siege. Their lives were changed forever. The government will consider the recommendations carefully and continue to strengthen arrangements where needed. Mr Speaker, our first priority is to keep Australians safe. Our agencies, with whom I and my ministers are in constant touch, are constantly upgrading, reviewing, adjusting our response measures. We must be more agile than those who seek to do us harm. We will always work tirelessly to keep Australians safe, and we do that by destroying Daesh in the field in the Middle East and by destroying their networks here at home. We will keep Australians safe. We have the best agencies, the best intelligence services in the world. There are no guarantees, of course, but since September 14, when the threat level was raised, there have been 63 arrests for terrorism offences, another one just this week. 12 major plots have been disrupted, and we continue to use every avenue available at our disposal, providing additional resources, whether they be financial or legal, whether it relate to signals intelligence or human intelligence or hard power. We will do all we can, as we always have, to keep Australians safe, to defend the liberty that this parliament is established to preserve.
The Foreign Minister also strongly condemned those attacks and mentioned that there is an upgraded travel warning for any Australians in the United Kingdom.
The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on what the government is doing to ensure the safety of Australians at home and abroad?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for North Sydney for his question. The Australian government condemns in the strongest possible way the horrific attack in Manchester that was calculated to kill innocent young people. While we have no information to suggest that any Australians were among those killed or injured, it will be some time before all the victims are identified. We should remember that around 1 million Australians visit the United Kingdom each year, and that at any one time there are about 130,000 Australians who are resident in the United Kingdom. Mr Speaker, I can confirm that the Australian government has updated our travel advice for the United Kingdom, and I will quote from that advice. The United Kingdom government has increased the United Kingdom's domestic threat level to critical, the highest of the UK's 5 domestic threat levels. UK Prime Minister May has also announced that armed soldiers will be deployed in UK cities to assist police with security, continue to avoid the area surrounding the Manchester Arena, and anticipate significant transport delays in the Manchester area. Expect an increased police and security presence across the United Kingdom. Be vigilant with your personal security. Monitor the media and follow local authorities' instructions on safety and security. In light of the United Kingdom's increase to its threat level, we now advise you to exercise a high degree of caution in the United Kingdom. And I can advise the House that the threat assessment means not only is an attack considered highly likely, but that a further attack may be imminent. Mr Speaker, we are in contact with British authorities who have confirmed that a police investigation continues to find all the perpetrators who may have been involved in this attack, for there is a concern that this attack was the work of a wider terrorist cell with links outside the United Kingdom. As the Prime Minister said, the Australian government will do all that we can to keep Australians safe at home and abroad, and our security measures are under constant review. Mr Speaker, we have boosted our counter-terrorism efforts to protect Australians at home and abroad with an additional $550 million in this most recent budget. Mr Speaker, we have cancelled or refused to issue passports of over 205 Australian citizens who seek to travel to the Middle East to support or work with terrorist organisations, including ISIS. Mr Speaker, there are 200 Australians under active investigation for seeking to support terrorist organisations. We are unrelenting in our efforts to seek out those who wish to do us harm.
Amidst this heightened security threat, Independent MP Andrew Wilkie wanted to know what was being done not just at international airports but the rest of the airports around the country.
Prime Minister, the Australian Federal Police were withdrawn from Hobart Airport in 2014, even though the 2007 Glasgow airport attack forewarned us of the vulnerability of attacks at second-tier airports. Moreover, your government concedes, especially after Manchester, that homegrown terrorists and soft targets are pressing concerns right now. In other words, the risk isn't diminished for non-international airports. So, Prime Minister, now that you've increased the AFP's budget by over $500 million, will you urgently remedy this alarming situation and reinstate the AFP presence at Hobart Airport, or will your government continue to treat Tasmanians as second-class citizens?
Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr Speaker, the Office of Transport Security is responsible for the categorisation of security at controlled airports, and it was determined, as the honourable member said, in 2014 that the threat environment did not require the presence of AFP officers there. That risk assessment was based on the advice of the AFP and the intelligence agencies. I've spoken today again to the Deputy Commissioner National Security of the Australian Federal Police, and he's advised me that the risk profile has not changed. The Tasmania Police provide community policing and crime prevention support at the airport in the same way that they provide services at other Australian airports. Now, Mr Speaker, the AFP has a presence in Tasmania and works seamlessly with the Tasmania Police and all of our law enforcement and national security agencies. Those men and women are in the front line keeping us safe. They put their lives on the line. They are the best in the world. And, Mr Speaker, on Monday we saw in Queensland the tragic murder of Senior Constable Brett Fort, a police officer who, like too many before him, lost his life in the line of duty. Our condolences and our love go to his wife, his children, his family and his colleagues. Now, Mr Speaker, the threat of Islamist terrorism, the threat of this extremist violence is here at home and it is right around the world. We saw last night a young 12-year-old Australian girl killed by a terrorist attack, an ISIL attack in Baghdad. She was visiting Baghdad with her family during Ramadan to see her grandfather. Another innocent killed by this violent tendency, this violent terrorist movement that is gnawing away, seeking to destroy and pervert and blaspheme one of the great religions of the world. Now, our police officers and our intelligence agencies are in the front line of keeping us safe in that battle. And our allies, our best collaborators, are Muslim leaders, both at home and abroad, like President Widodo in Indonesia, who remind us and say repeatedly and stand for an Islam that is moderate, that is tolerant, that is democratic. That's their commitment. They are our best allies in this battle. But in the forefront stand those police officers and those intelligence agencies, and we have given them and are giving them more support, both in law, legislation and resources, than ever before, and we will continue to do so to keep all Australians and all Tasmanians safe.
There was also a focus of the tragic case of a young Australian girl killed during a visit to Iraq. She was visiting a relative in an ice cream parlour when an explosion went off.
My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister outline to the House why the largest military build-up in our peacetime history is vital to defeating our enemies abroad so that we can be safe at home?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Dunkley for his question. As members are aware, there were 2 heinous attacks in Baghdad overnight, and we express our deepest sympathies to the people of Iraq and to the family of an Australian girl, Zainab al-Habir, who was mentioned before in question time, who was killed in one of the attacks. IS has claimed responsibility for the attack. We condemn these attacks in the strongest terms and reaffirm our commitment to defeat IS in Iraq and to prevent its spread throughout the world. Defeating IS abroad will ensure the safety of Australians at home. That's one of the reasons for the government's commitment to our largest military build-up in our peacetime history. The Turnbull government will ensure, including through our record $200 billion investment in defence capability, that our ADF can continue to apply lethal force required to defeat terrorists abroad. Australia continues to make one of the largest contributions to the campaign in the Middle East. Up to 760 ADF members are currently deployed, including 300 members in the task group Taji training Iraqi army troops, 120 members of the Special Operations Task Group providing advice and assistance to the Iraqi counter-terrorism service, 300 members of the Air Task Group conducting airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, and 55 members embedded in coalition positions in Iraq. Since October 2014, there have been more than 2,300 ADF airstrike sorties over Iraq, delivering 1,900 weapons into Iraq and Syria. And let's not forget, Mr Speaker, that it was this Prime Minister who altered our approach to targeting enemy combatants in Syria and Iraq so that our forces are empowered to act against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, no matter where they are or what they are doing, so long as they belong to the group of terrorists that we seek to eliminate. It's also in Australia's national interest, Mr Speaker, to ensure Afghanistan never again becomes a haven for terrorists. In response to a NATO request, the Australian government has agreed to increase the Australian Defence Force's mission to Afghanistan by 30 personnel from around 270 to around 300. These additional personnel will further develop the long-term capabilities of the Afghan security forces as part of our current train, advise and assist mission. They will not be in combat roles, and the Chief of the Defence Force remains in discussion with NATO officials regarding the task allocation for these additional forces, which will be confirmed in coming weeks. An increased Australian contribution to the Resolute Support Mission is part of Australia not just being a supporter of the war on terror, but being capable of taking part in it in an effective and meaningful way. And I thank the opposition, the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Minister for Defence for their continued bipartisan approach to these matters in support of our ADF serving overseas.
Despite Labor having now committed to basically the full suite of the Coalition's measures on border patrol, the Coalition, now that it's in government, is still keen to point out Labor's failures when it was in power.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the Minister update the House on the importance of maintaining Australia's strong and consistent border protection policies? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for his question and thank all of the colleagues on this side of the House for their consistent support in backing a strong border protection policy. As Mr Speaker, the Australian public knows that the Turnbull government has not only stopped boats, but we are determined to keep that policy into the future because the threat of people smugglers has not dissipated, Mr Speaker. It has now been 1,039 days since the last successful boat arrival, but Australia is still burdened, I'm sorry to say, with the disastrous legacy of Labor's border protection policies. Now, we do know, all Australians know, that 50,000 people, Mr Speaker, came on 800 boats and 1,200 people drowned at sea, and we know that 8,000 children went into detention. But I don't think all Australians know this figure. So far to date, Labor's policy failure on boats has cost the Australian taxpayer $13.7 billion. But it doesn't stop there, Mr Speaker, because the meter is still running. It is costing the taxpayer of Australia today $1.9 billion every year, and it will take us years to clean up Labor's mess. Now, Mr Speaker, you would have thought that Labor had learnt their lesson, but the reality is they have not. Because when you consider those people on the front bench of the Australian Labor Party today, they are the people in government that presided over the decisions that resulted in this policy outrage. We know, for example, Mr Speaker, the member for Watson was minister when 83 boats arrived, carrying 6,634 people, and 1,103 children were detained under his watch. We know, Mr Speaker, that the member for Gorton was minister with 184 boats on his arrival, and those boats carried 12,800 people, and that 2,000 children went into detention under his watch. But let's come, Mr Speaker, to the crescendo. That is the member for McMahon. This man, who wants to be the treasurer of this country, he presided over the fuel watch and grocery watch, but his greatest work as a minister in the Gillard government came as immigration minister. 25,000 people arrived on 398 boats when the member for McMahon was the Minister for Immigration. But worse than that, Mr Speaker, over 4,000 children went into detention. Now, he could pretend to be in conversation with the member for Sydney The reality is, Mr Speaker, we need bipartisanship on the issue of boats policy and stopping people coming into our country illegally. The fact is that Labor Party, Mr Speaker, has not learnt their lesson. There is not bipartisanship in this country when it comes to boat policy, and Labor has not learnt their lesson in relation to recent mistakes, and this Leader of the Opposition has failed the test.
There was a security scare in Australia's skies as well during this period. A flight taking off from Melbourne having to return there. It was meant to go to Malaysia, but a man on board said he had a bomb. This turned out not to be the case, but did put a focus on the security when it comes to those types of situations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on measures the government takes to keep Australians safe and our transport system secure?
The Prime Minister has the call.
National security. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question and acknowledge the honourable member's long experience and service in our police forces. Mr Speaker, members will be aware that a man attempted to gain access to the cockpit of Malaysian Airlines MH128 shortly after takeoff last night. The passengers on the flight bravely put themselves in harm's way to restrain the man, and the incident is now resolved with all on board safe. The Australian Federal Police is working with Victoria Police to determine the exact circumstances of the incident. I can confirm that the matter is not currently being treated as terrorism-related, and I'm informed that the man has a criminal history and has previously been treated for mental health issues. Now, the government, as it should, takes aviation security very seriously indeed, and we have a comprehensive and strong transport security system in place. It is constantly being reviewed to ensure it remains effective and proportionate to the risk environment. We do everything we can to ensure Australians fly safely and securely. Our transport security system is designed to keep Australians safe, prevent acts of unlawful interference, include the screening of passengers and baggage, hardened cockpit doors, training cabin crew so they can handle suspicious passenger behaviour and respond to threats to security. It involves plainclothes in-flight security officers and ensuring that unauthorised items are not placed on board aircraft. In April, the government implemented new security arrangements for inbound flights from Abu Dhabi, Dubai and Doha. Passengers are now randomly selected for explosive trace detection tests prior to boarding the aircraft. Mr Speaker, the #1 priority for my government and every government must be to keep Australians safe and protect our way of life. And that is why we're investing an additional $321 million to ensure the AFP has the specialist capabilities it needs to address the criminal and terrorist threats in the future. It's the largest single funding boost to the AFP's domestic policing capabilities in over a decade. We recognise that law enforcement must be equipped with the resources to respond to new and emerging criminal threats. And, Mr Speaker, so far this year we've seen the AFP and its partners intercept record shipments of cocaine, 1.4 tonnes, and methamphetamine, 903 kilograms. These have been intercepted because of the resources, the training and the professionalism that they have. Our police and security agencies, as honourable members know, have thwarted 12 major Australian-based terror plots since September 2014. They're on the front line, we're supporting them and they're keeping us safe.
The world has reacted to Donald Trump deciding, yes, he will pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. Australia won't do so, but Labor was keen to highlight the fact that some coalition members of the government were hoping that would be the action of Malcolm Turnbull.
The member for Port Adelaide has the call.
Well, thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to reports that President Trump is poised to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Just before midnight last night, in response to those reports, the chair of the Coalition's Environment and Energy Committee, the member for Hughes, posted, "It's not confirmed yet, but have the champagne on ice." John Howard followed the United States out of Kyoto when George W. Bush rejected it. So how can anyone have confidence that this government won't do exactly that with the Paris Agreement?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. And, Mr Speaker, I repeat today what I said on the 16th of November when the treaty was ratified. When Australia makes a commitment to a global agreement, we followed through, and that is exactly what we are doing. We are committed to the Paris Agreement, and we are on track. We are on track to meet our targets. We are committed to ensuring that Australia has affordable and reliable energy, and do so, achieve that, while meeting our global commitments for emissions reduction. That is our commitment. And what we're doing is taking real and practical action to get that job done. The Deputy Prime Minister talked about our commitment to Snowy Hydro 2.0, the largest commitment to storage to support renewable energy in the Southern Hemisphere. That is a vital project. The Labor Party, especially in the honourable member's state, allowed renewable energy to be rolled out, wind, at such an extent that it can provide well over 100% of his state's electricity, but then at the next minute, zero. No storage, no plan, no backup. The Labor Party has allowed gas prices to go through the roof on the East Coast, and we have had to take the steps to bring them down. The decisive action that I took as Prime Minister to ensure that we would limit exports so as to be confident that gas demand was met on the east coast of Australia has already seen the wholesale price come down, as it ought and as it needs to do. Mr Speaker, that's our commitment: affordable, reliable energy and meeting our emissions reduction targets in accordance with our commitment to the Paris Treaty. And Mr Speaker, if I may, on indulgence, because the honourable member is from South Australia, and the school the member for Sydney asked me about earlier was from South Australia, can I say that Our Lady of Lavang School will receive an extra $3.9 million over the next 10 years, and the per-student contribution from the Commonwealth on the government's estimator will go from $28,855 to $41,390 in 2027. Once again, the member for Sydney set out to mislead the House with claims of cuts that are simply not true.
Despite that, meaning the US and Australia don't exactly see eye to eye at the moment on reactions to climate change. The two countries are still very close on the defence and strategic element, as was highlighted by the recent AUSMIN talks.
My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on the Australia-United States Foreign Affairs and Defence Ministers meeting next week?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Groom for his question and his interest in this very important meeting. Next week, the Defence Minister, Senator Marise Payne, and I will host in Sydney US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, US Secretary of Defence General Jim Mattis, for the annual Australia-US ministerial consultations known as AUSMIN. Mr Speaker, AUSMIN has been the principal forum for our bilateral consultations for about the past 30 years, and this ministerial meeting will be the first formal ministerial meeting with the new Trump administration. It follows on from the very successful visit to Australia by Vice President Pence, the Prime Minister's meeting with President Trump in New York, and indeed there have been 13 ministerial visits to the United States since the inauguration, all high-level, all targeted to matters that will benefit the Australian people. Mr Speaker, AUSMIN builds on the very strong foundation of this long-standing bilateral relationship built up over 100 years and formalised in 1951 with the signing of the ANZUS Treaty by my distinguished predecessor, Foreign Minister Percy Spender, and US Secretary of State Dean Acheson. Mr Speaker, Defence Minister Payne and I will discuss with our US counterparts a wide range of matters of mutual interest and concern, particularly security issues involving North Korea, our cooperation in Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria, how we work together on countering terrorism, on defeating ISIS, our intelligence sharing for the benefit of our citizens and our region. Mr Speaker, Australia and the United States are like-minded in our commitment to defend the international rules-based order, and we work together exceedingly well and very closely in regional forums including APEC, and I'm delighted to hear that President Trump will be at the East Asia Summit in Manila in November. Mr Speaker, few countries can claim to be as close as Australia and the United States. Few countries are more important to Australia than the United States, our strongest and closest strategic and defence partner, the source of the greatest amount of foreign direct investment, and indeed the United States is our second largest trading partner. Together we work closely for the peace, prosperity and stability of our region, and AUSMIN provides a very valuable opportunity for the Defence Minister and the Foreign Ministers of the United States and the Defence Minister of the United States to share perspectives, to share insights, not only for the benefit of the Australian people and the citizens of the United States, but for our region and globally.
And that's Question Time Wrap for this period of Australian Parliament between the 22nd of May and the 1st of June. I'm Tom Connell. Thanks for watching.